Well, thank you, Doug. Can everybody hear okay? My voice usually carries pretty well, so I typically don't have a problem being heard. In fact, usually when I walk home at night, my wife is going, shh, you know, you can tone it down a little bit, you're home now. I've got a few slides here. I'm going to fly through these fairly quickly. A lot of what I have to say is to try to put the U.S. system kind of in context. And again, there's this general idea that the marketing system within the Canadian, as the Canadian system goes through its transitions, will migrate towards and move towards more of the U.S. system. In my opinion, I think there will always be some differences between our two systems. There's obviously cultural differences. There's also some substantial infrastructure differences that we have to recognize. But there's going to be a lot of similarities. And so with that, again, most of my background, most of the time that I spend is working primarily with farmers as well as with folks in agribusiness, talking about the marketing system, supply chain management issues, and fortunately contracting, which is one of the ways that we kind of help coordinate some of the activities going on. First, some obvious comments, and this is other speakers have done this much more eloquently than I have, but you know, both farmers, the grain companies, the railroads, end users, everybody is now trying to figure out how is this new system going to evolve? What is this going to look like? What do I need to do to prepare for this? And I don't think anybody has all the pieces to all the puzzle yet, but we're going to find out fairly quickly. I am really going to try and take a focus on what the Canadian farmer needs to do and try and again be proactive in moving into transitioning into this new marketing environment. And at the end of the day, whether you like the transition that's going on or not, and whether regardless of the policy implications, farmers are going to have to make some marketing decisions now. Okay, just as you have done in canola and the pulses, flax, oats, some of the other crops. One of the things I want to make the connection between the contracting issues is also risk management, and in particular price volatility. And I'm going to show you a couple slides in a moment to try and dramatize how that has changed in the last couple of years. And most of the programs that I do with farmers talk about how do you adjust to these rapidly changing, highly volatile commodity prices. What can you do and how can you do a better job of marketing? This is some price information. My predecessor has started collecting in my position. These are actual cash market prices for an elevator, a large regional elevator in Minot, North Dakota. And again, that would be essentially the Saskatchewan, Manitoba border straight south. Okay, they handle a wide range of commodities. And as you can see by that, we've had quite a bit of volatility over the last several years. The green line on the top is the price for durum. Now, this is spot market cash prices that the farmers receive. Okay, so if I, as a farmer, want to deliver grain to Minot, this is the price I'd receive at the end of the day. So the green line is durum prices, the red line is spring wheat prices, and the purple line on the bottom is malt barley. Right now in the U.S., we don't produce a lot of feed barley, but most of it's on malt barley. One of the things I want to show you is that transition zone. We had what I'm going to call the old days, and now kind of this new environment that even we in the States are dealing with. In the old days, look at that price volatility. We did have prices varying and bouncing around quite a bit, but then in about 2007, we saw some substantial shifts. Okay, and I'm going to argue as we move forward in time that kind of price volatility we've seen post-2007 probably won't change very quickly. And that's really a new environment for us in the States as well. To put this a little bit differently, to put it in a little bit different context, this is just for spring wheat. And I have the graphs for durum and barley if you're interested. This is just the price change from 1 week to the next. So this now, instead of doing the absolute prices, we're just looking at how have prices changed from 1 week to the next. And again, you can see in that 2007 time period, in the old days, yes, we had volatility in prices, and the price of wheat varied quite a bit. But look what's happened since 2007. It's a completely different environment. Not only have the base prices risen, but the volatility in prices has increased substantially. And we're now reaching the point, at least in the U.S., where our cost of production is starting to keep pace or catch up with very quickly with the higher level of prices that we're seeing right now. So instead of being volatility saying, well, do I earn some rate of return or some profit per acre? or I'm earning a lot, very quickly we're going to get to the point where I'll be either making money or losing money depending upon the volatility in prices. So risk management is taking on a completely different element in decision making and in particular in marketing. One of the things I want to point out too also is that in the States we have a very wide spectrum of contracts that are available. And I was fortunate enough a couple of years ago to get a small grant to look at the variety of contracts that are available, not only in the small market crops, those that don't have futures markets, but also in the larger market crops that do. And I want to segregate these into kind of three general categories. The black category on top is, for example, when you look at pre-plant or pre-harvest contracting, what are the tools that we have available in our toolbox? The forward cash contracts is really a cash-based mechanism. So from a farmer standpoint, this is equivalent to a cash sale with delayed pricing, or delayed delivery, excuse me. The blue contracts, when you look at hedge to arrive, basis contracts, minimum price contracts, those are contracts you sign with the local elevator, but they have a futures market component to it. So essentially in the pricing equation, you've only priced in a portion of the steps that need to be implemented. The ones on the bottom, the green ones, are strategies that can be implemented where you as a farmer go directly to a broker and get directly active in the futures market. So in the blue area, essentially you're using the futures market, but you're doing that through the local elevator or the local processor. They're the ones that are acting as your broker. Okay? Now in small market crops where we don't have a futures market, that top one is really the only one we have available in our toolbox for pricing. Okay, so you think about field pea, lentil, flax. Cash forward contracts, there are processors and buyers, end users that will offer those. The point is when you move to the larger market crops, the ones that do have futures markets to them, the tools we have in our toolbox, both for pre-plant and pre-harvest contracting, as well as post-harvest price setting, changes. The toolbox gets much bigger. And again, I've done the same basic thing with post-harvest. So again, there's some pricing opportunities you can do before you plant or before harvest. You actually can price before you've got the grain in hand. And then there's the post-harvest. Post-harvest ones, again, you can sell at harvest, right directly off the combine. And there's certain years that's not a bad strategy. Most years it's probably not the best time to be selling. You can store cash grain. And in a few moments, I'm going to show you some other information that say, that we've also seen some shifts in the cash market that have really provided significant incentives for farmers to store grain. Okay, and that's one of the many reasons we're seeing a lot of brand new storage facilities showing up on farms in North Dakota. But again, we have delayed pricing contracts, hedge to arrive contracts, basis contracts, minimum price contracts. Again, those are all contracts you can sign with a processor or your local elevator, and they are then essentially acting as the broker within these marketing strategies versus going directly into the futures market yourself and working directly with a broker, which is the green ones. I want to flash this up real quick because this is something I have been a very strong promoter of in my discussions with farmers because it's what I call is kind of a cheat sheet. and I know as an instructor I'm not supposed to talk about cheat sheets, but it is something that as a practical standpoint, it becomes a very good handy reference. This was put together a few years back by Dr. Jake Ferris or John Ferris out of Michigan State University. Started working on it kind of in the early 1980s and has slowly developed and evolved over time. But it really does act as a very nice tool for saying, or a diagram for explaining when do you use the different contracts that you have available. Okay? Under what market conditions do these different contracts work better or worse? It also then helps to explain why a particular type of contract worked very well one year and didn't work very well at the next year. For example, a basis contract. I know there's quite a few canola processors that are doing some basis contracts now. There's years basis contracts work extremely well, and there's certain market conditions where they work extremely well, and there's times that it does not. So again, I just throw that up there that these kinds of resources are available. And please take some time and effort to study them and get to know them because they are very valuable tools. So let me talk a little bit about futures markets. And I know that's one of the challenges within the Canadian spring wheat you're going to be facing is this risk management and can we use futures market effectively to help shed some of the risk that's going to be exposed. So futures market offers us two very important things, an active, viable futures market. First is price discovery. Now, do you have to have futures markets for price discovery? It's a rhetorical question, guys. Technically, no. We've got price discovery going on in other commodities, right? But it does work more effectively. It does give us a broader picture of what the market opportunities are. At least, and I'll give you Durham as an example. In the States, one of the questions I commonly get from farmers on the North Dakota side is, well, yeah, the local elevator is offering a price for Durham, but does that really reflect the underlying value of the Durham that I have in my bin? How do I know that that's a representative price? Well, again, a lot of times the futures market is used as that neutral base to say, okay, if the futures price today went up, and I didn't check before I came up, but if it went up 30 cents today, 50 cents, if the futures price for wheat went up 50 cents and the local price went up 25, is there a problem? Or can that differential be explained? I mean, it's another piece of information that you have available for trying to make informed decisions. The second one, which is really the one that I try and focus on in a lot of my discussions with North Dakota farmers, is risk transfer or risk shifting. And there's different ways you can accomplish that. And again, depending on what marketing tool you're using, some of those will do a very effective job of shifting risk. Some of them will be less effective in shifting risk. But in the futures market, we need two general classes of people. Believe it or not, we do need speculators to make the futures market work. So we have hedgers, which are individuals that are trying to shift risk to someone else. And in farmer language, what I say is, look, if you're a hedger, what you're trying to do is use the futures market to lock in a price. Okay? So if you're using a tool to try and lock in a price, somewhere in the mechanics, you're hedging. Now, if as a speculator, again, you have to have somebody on the other end of that transaction. When one person buys, the other person has to sell, and vice versa. As a speculator, we need those folks. I know they get kind of lambasted a lot and picked on quite a bit, but we do need them to have a market function efficiently. And there are times that a farmer may want to speculate. And I suspect right now, most farmers in the room are speculating. They're just speculating in the cash market. You're gambling that the cash market's going to come up. You've got inventory, right? Speculating in the futures markets is a bit different. But if you're going to use again, in farmer language, if you're using the futures market to try and enhance price, you're going to be speculating somewhere along the way. You're either going to speculate in the cash market or you're going to speculate in the futures market. Right? Let's talk about the alternative markets for wheat. In the United States, technically we have 4 now. We think of 3 originally. The Chicago Board of Trade is the largest when it comes to volume. And understand, in the States, we have 6 different classes of wheat that we trade. 3 of those have futures markets. We have soft red winter wheat, which is kind of grown in this east central portion, the Corn Belt. And I looked this up as of Friday. These are the trading volumes on Friday. The September contract out of Chicago on Friday, there was about 45,000 contracts traded, just in that 1 month. Now that would be essentially a new crop month. Kansas City Board of Trade, that's hard red winter wheat. That would be the Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma wheat. That's our base wheat for bread. Last Friday, again, September contract, about 8,600 contracts were traded. Then we get to Minneapolis. The Minneapolis is the hard red spring wheat contract, futures contract. That would be most comparable to the Canadian hard red, the CWRS. Yep, that'd be very similar to a CWRS. Not identical, but very similar. Had about 2,200 contracts traded on Friday. Okay, and again, the September contract. So you notice that even though when you look at bushels, we produce more bushels of hard red winter wheat in the U.S. than any other class. Number 2 is spring wheat, hard red spring wheat. A distant third is a soft red winter wheat. So why, given the fact that we have so little soft red winter wheat produced, why is the Chicago market the most active? Anybody answer that? Pardon? History. History has something to do with it, but if it was truly history, things would adjust fairly quickly. There's more speculators. What other contracts are traded in Chicago? Corn and soybeans. Okay, and I looked it up. Corn, the December corn contract, as of last Friday, had 120,000 shares contracts traded. So if you're in there for speculation, if you're in there to try and get an active market, Chicago's the place to be. Now let's look at ICE Canada. ICE Canada, the Winnipeg Exchange, has the contracts for canola, right? They also recently started 2 contracts for wheat, a spring wheat and a durum. And to be very honest, I truly hope, and I've told North Dakota farmers this for a while, I truly, truly hope that the durum contract out of Winnipeg gets up and running, gets active, because that would solve a lot of issues for us in the States as well. I really hope. I'm not terribly optimistic, but I truly hope. As of Friday, 0 contracts were traded. Thursday, there were 0 contracts traded. Wednesday, there were 0 contracts traded. In fact, we only have 30 contracts of open interest as of Friday. On the durum contract, essentially the same thing. 0 contracts on Friday, 0 on Thursday, 0 on Wednesday, and there's only 27 open contracts. So if you're a grain company, or if you're a farmer and you're trying to use the futures market to try and lock in some prices, where do you go? I would recommend the closest thing you have available is Minneapolis. Minneapolis Grain Exchange with the hard red spring wheat futures contract is the closest to the kind of wheat you grow up here. And my research colleague, Dr. William Wilson, or Bill Wilson, he was referred to earlier, he has done over the last 25 years, done multiple studies on trying to cross-hedge or use the Minneapolis contract to try and hedge durum. Consistently said, look, don't even waste your time. It just doesn't work. There's a few places in history where it may have worked, but on a regular basis, it just isn't there. The relationships, they're 2 separate markets. They're 2 different. Not long after the ICE Winnipeg contract came available for spring wheat and durum in Canada, the ICE US out of New York also added a wheat, soybean, and corn contract. Okay, now those are very new. Those have only been trading for approximately a month, a little over. As of Friday, they had 596 contracts traded. Relatively thin. That was really designed, as I understand it, to try and tap into the speculative community in the finance world. So what's the role of contracting? Let's put all this into perspective. Again, this comes back to some of the research that I've been able to do at North Dakota State. When I interviewed the people within companies that write the contracts and offer the contracts and negotiate with farmers, the procurement people, whether they be at an elevator or processor, here's some commonalities. First, there was a lot of variability across commodities. And I'm talking the full spectrum of commodities. On one end, I'm going to try and give you some bookends. On one end, probably the most detailed and complex were the malt barley contracts. On the other end was the standard corn contract for delivery, a forward price contract. That was probably the simplest and most standardized. So we have this wide spectrum of contracts available across commodities. There was obviously a lot of variability across companies. And one of the things that came out was there also changes over time. So just because you've been contracting with one company consistently over several years, every year there's little tweaks and changes made to the provisions. So my greatest concern, and the reason that I tried to do this kind of background research on it, was to say, look, folks, don't get enamored with the price. Don't just go in, look at the price and say, boy, this is a good deal, sign on the bottom line. You really need to what's going on and what the provisions are, because they do change. When you take a step back and say conceptually, what do contracts do? Well, they're really a promise for a future exchange. And because it's a future time differential, the contract divides value. And when I say value, I'm not just talking about price. Okay? Price is what you get. Price is what you're paid. Value is what you get. So think of it as gross versus net. So the contract price says, I'm going to pay you $8 for spring wheat. Now, what do I got to do to get paid $8 for spring wheat? Well, the contract specifies what I got to do. Control rights. and this is as you get into some of the specialty crops or the smaller market crops, control rights get to be a big deal. For example, in the malt barley, who decides what varieties I can plant? In spring wheat, I can essentially, as long as I get the quality characteristics, I can plant any variety I want to. If I'm going to sign a malting barley contract with one company versus another, they want different varieties because they're looking for a different enzyme profile and looking for different tastes in their beer. So if I contract with, let's say, Anheuser-Busch versus Cargill Malt, there's different sets of varieties that are listed in those contracts. They then have imputed control rights onto what varieties I can grow. Divide risk and uncertainty. I mean, who can make these decisions about, well, if things don't work really well, who makes decisions about the value? And I'll give you an example very quickly. What happens if you come up short on your production? Let's say you put in a guaranteed delivery. Let's say I sign a contract, guaranteed delivery of 15,000 bushels. I have a hailstorm that comes through and says, whoop, I only produced 10. Now what do? Well, depends upon how the contract is structured. Is there an act of God clause included in it or not? The last thing I want to point out is all contracts are incomplete, meaning every farmer in this room wants to have a one-page contract. And the question is, why do these things get to be so complicated? Well, inevitably what happens is, yeah, they start out with one-page contract, and then they run into a problem. Say, oh, next year we got to solve this, and they put in some clauses to say, well, we're going to cover this particular problem. Now, if you were to do that for all the possible problems you could think of, you'd have a stack of paper about 6 feet deep, and nobody would read the thing anyway. Okay, so it's all a matter of what do you include in the contract, and typically the things included are going to be the ones of greatest value to the buyer, not necessarily to the seller. So again, recognize that not everything is going to be covered within the contract. Here's some of the variability. Here's, as you're reading through the contract, and again, I'm not saying that they're good contracts or bad contracts. I'm not going to make a value judgment. You have to do that to say, are the terms and conditions in this contract something that I'm comfortable with? That's something I can't do for you. But I can point out some of the things you need to be looking for, thinking about, or asking questions about. Is it how, you'd think quantity should be a simple thing to include, right? Not necessarily. And again, depending upon what class or what commodity you're talking about, you can have full production contracts where basically you're contracting an acre, and whatever you produce on that acre goes into this processor. Okay, the processor now has yield risk. If you get a poor yield, he doesn't get as much. If you get a good yield, he gets more. Well, again, you get paid for what you produce. Is it a partial production contract, meaning that you contract so many acres, but it's only those first units of production that are covered under the contract? Okay, so normally I produce 2,000 pounds or a ton of canola. We sell a canola in hundredweight or 1,000 or pounds. So let's say normally you get 2,000 pounds an acre. All right, the first 1,000 is covered by the contract. What happens to the extra 1,000? Fixed quantity, again, that's more in the grains where you sign up and say, well, I'm going to deliver, I guarantee delivery for 15,000 bushels of malt barley. They don't care where you grow it or how many extra acres you have, you just better deliver 15,000 bushels, and the contract covers those for 15,000. Act of God clause provisions are common for those that are partial production contracts. Translation, they're in the States relatively common in canola, sunflower, field pea, lentil. Not common at all in durum, spring wheat, corn, soybeans. Quality specifications, and this is one of the substantial differences between the canola market and the issues that the canola industry is looking at versus the spring wheat market, and in particular the durum market, is quality specifications. And I know this is one thing we talked about earlier today about standardized grades versus buyer spec. Okay, and we have all of the above. Some of the contracts you're going to see will typically, well, almost all of them will have minimum quality specifications laid out, saying to fulfill this contract, you have to have this minimum. Sometimes that minimum is just, in our case, USDA standards, or in your case, Canadian Grain Commission standards. But the industry now is going more and more and more to buyer specification, meaning one company, they say, look, I don't care what USDA number 1 is. That's not detailed enough for me. I want this. And they're actually trying to contract for specific characteristics. Okay? The other question you need to ask is that quality specifications, if you don't meet that, is that grounds for rejection? Or is that grounds for discounts? And there's a big difference. Timing and location of delivery. And most of the stuff's fairly common. The one thing I want to point out is, have you guys experienced buyer call? Where they have buyer call provisions in contracts? It's very, very common in malt barley. In fact, almost the whole industry's gone to it. You combine your crop, you put it in a bin, you send in a sample to see if it met quality specifications. If it did, they'll call you up when they want it. You don't deliver when you want to, you deliver when the buyer wants it. And that could be 2 weeks from now, it could be 2 months from now, it could be 12 months from now. So we'll look for that little buyer call provision. Where do you deliver? Is it your local elevator or is it to the processor? And in our case, that can be substantial. It can be a couple of 100-mile difference. Trucking costs add up. Pricing alternatives. Most of the contracts we've seen are fixed price, meaning that when you walk in, you just look at the price on it. You're guaranteed the price if you can deliver that quality. Some of them now are moving to pricing formulas. Okay, where again, it's based off of some futures contract. The food-grade soybean industry is starting to move in this direction rapidly. The last thing I want to say about pricing is the premiums and discounts, and I'm going to transition to some of those issues. Premiums and discounts, the quality standards are in the contracts. The value of the premium or discount is not. That is typically established at the time of delivery. And depending upon the day you deliver, those premiums and discounts could change. So let me show you a little bit. In just a minute, I'll show you that. Timing of payment, when do you get paid? In the States, you don't get paid till you deliver and finish all the deliveries. And sometimes they're in sequential payments. The last thing I want to point out, I know there was a speaker earlier talking about counterparty risk. What happens if the other person, the business you're dealing with, fails? And we had that in the ethanol industry. We've had that in the pulse industry in the States when we first started getting into pulses. What I have seen is that who you're doing business with is very important. Okay? And it's during times of transition that we have the most problem with this. Because businesses are trying to adapt and sometimes they guess wrong. And as a result, they either go bankrupt or they're bought by another company. And the last thing is, if you do have some disputes, how do you get those settled? Do you sit down with the manager and go and hash it out? Is there an independent arbitrator that's assigned? Do you do arbitration, mediation? Or worst case scenario, you've got to bring it to the court system. Let me talk just a little bit about quality issues. Other market risks. Basis. Anybody give me a definition of basis really quick? Brian, you can't answer this one. How do you define basis? I mean, you guys are familiar with that in canola, right? What's the simplest textbook definition? It's simply the difference between the local cash market and typically the nearby futures market. So it's that spread. The futures market everybody's looking at. The local basis is basically the price at your local position. Now, local basis can be different. Moose Jaw can be different than Saskatoon, which can be different from Regina. Okay? There are obvious differences. Now, the reason basis fluctuates, because it's not static. The relationship between cash and futures is not fixed. In fact, it's quite variable. And that's part of my story here. The cash and the futures market don't always move together. And they don't move together for a couple reasons. Number one, we don't have the same participants. There's people active in the futures market that are not engaged in the cash market. And there's people in the cash market not engaged in the futures market, especially local cash market. The other thing is they don't respond to information at the same rate. So a lot of times, the futures market will respond anticipating some issues, and the cash market will lag behind a little bit saying, well, we're going to really see if this develops. For example, a weather scare, which is essentially what caused our big run up today. Here's the basis at Minot. Now, this is for spring wheat. So this is the difference between the local cash price of spring wheat, what the farmer gets, and the futures price at Minneapolis on the same day. Okay, and that red line, 2004, 2005, is right out of the textbooks. The basis tends to be widest at harvest because the cash market's saying, we're getting so much grain right now, we'll pay you to put it in a bin and wait. We don't need any more. That spread is the widest then, right? And then as you move through the middle of winter, you get in January, February, when's the basis typically narrowest? When does the cash market have to work really hard to get you guys to haul grain? When it's colder and blazes out and you got to blow snow to get there, right? That's very typical. This is the old days. Remember that first couple of graphs I had about the volatility of prices? These are the old days when life was very stable. This is what's happened since 2007 in basis. That same elevator, spring wheat, different years. Let me go back. This is the old days. This is what we've seen the last several years. So look at that green line, which is actually 2010-11. In the old days, we went from a low of what, about 30 cents under to maybe 10 cents over. That's about 40-cent spread from high to low. Look at the green one now in 2010-11. We went from a low of about $1.25 under to a high of about $1.25 over. That's a $3 spread. That's significant. Now here's what's happened since then. So this is last year. 2011-12 is the red line. We came down for those extreme levels, and what happened last winter? We kind of went back to that same old, well, we're relatively stable scenario. And this little black line way on the edge over here, right as we start out June, is where we are today. So as a farmer, what do you think is going to happen to the basis as we move forward in time? That extremely wide swing in the basis, that $3 I talked about earlier, one of the ways, not the only, one of the ways that you can capture that is through storing on farm. There's other ways to do it, but that's the simplest. In the last several years, the market has paid you substantial rewards for being careful about watching that spread between the cash and the futures. Depending upon the marketing tool you pick and when you pick it, I can help you capture a big chunk of that $3. Not all of it. I can't guarantee all of it. But I can help you get a big chunk of it. Would you be interested in half? If I could help you pick up half of that difference? $1.50? Yeah. Okay, what about grain quality? I'm almost done. Again, I don't want to take up more of my allotted time, and Ken was gracious enough to give me some of his so I could finish this up. What about grain quality? And let me just flash up the quality specs, typical quality specs for spring wheat in North Dakota. This is delivered cash. So at Minot, these are typical grade standards. 14 protein is the base. You go up or down from there depending upon your quality. If you get better than 14 Pro, you get a premium. If it's less than 14 Pro, you get a discount. Test weight. If you notice, every one of those, with the exception of protein, they set a base, and if you don't meet it, there's a discount. If you get better than that, there's no premium. In spring wheat, the only premium you're paid for is for protein. Why? Because it has an end-use value. It has an end-use value. One of the ones I know in doing other meetings up here in Saskatchewan is that some people understand falling numbers, some don't. Anybody understand or explain what falling numbers are? If you know about falling numbers, you've probably been tagged by it, right? You've been discounted. Essentially, falling numbers is a test for sprout damage, because you can have sprout damage that degrades the quality of the flour before you see a physical sprout. So this is a test to see as the enzymes in the seed started to change. The magic number is 300, so the lower the number, the worse. If it's 300 above, typically there's no discounts. If it's 300 or below, then you start getting discounts. The reason I put 3 to 350 is there's a few buyers, in particular international buyers, that want 350 or better. Okay? So this is not standard, and the falling numbers is not part of the USDA grading standards. That's something that is within industry. Let's talk about protein real quick, and then I'm done. Then we can ask questions or shift to the next speaker here. Protein spreads. This is something I've spent a lot of time over the last 2-3 years talking about. What I've done here is try to graph out the premium for 15% protein and the discount for 13% protein at Portland. I know Ken, later on, Ken is going to talk a little bit about price transparency. We've already had 1 or 2 speakers talk about that. USDA collects, through their ag marketing service, collects daily prices at major terminal ports. So I know what the bid is out of Portland. I know what the bid is for spring wheat out of New Orleans. And I can relate that back and say, well, how does that relate to the price that I'm getting. We also then have the futures market, right? The advantage of going to a port facility is they have quality specs in it. So USDA is reporting the price that's bid in Portland, 30-day to arrive for 15 protein wheat. So what I did was I took the price for 15, the price for 14, the price for 13, subtracted those out, tried to figure out what's this premium or discount. And actually, this has followed what's happened at the local level relatively close. Not perfectly, but pretty close. So let me point out a couple things. Remember I talked about the old days. Think about what is that, about 2008 right there, right? Most of the time we have very little premium or discount for protein in the marketplace. But once in a while we get these big pops. We get these spreads suddenly show up. And look what's happened the last couple of years. Now this begins in 1999 through 2012. Substantial shifts. That's why I've had to spend so much time talking about it. So let's take this same information and put it on a marketing year basis. Okay, so instead of just looking at it over time, what happens when we look at it for a marketing year? And the marketing year for wheat in the US starts on June 1. Why is that? Winter wheat. We start harvest. In fact, most of our winter wheat's combined already. We had an early year. So I know this is a really ugly graph. Let me clean it up a little bit and just talk about what's happened the last couple of years. So this is the discount for 13% protein. So instead of growing 14, for simplicity, let's say you delivered 13 Pro. What would be the discount in different years for doing that? Well, notice what's happened here. We have a very significant pattern going on if you look at what's happening right in that time period. Right? So if we look at 2008, we went from a discount of very little, about 10 cents per point, down to a discount of about 80 cents. And it kind of bounced around that 80-cent range for quite a while until we hit the next marketing year when all of a sudden it went from 80 down to $1.40. It recovered a little bit in the middle of winter, but then bounced around in about a $1.20 range till we had literally a gap in here where there was no bids for 13. And all of a sudden it dropped off, and now at the beginning of this harvest, just before harvest now in the States, we had a $1.80 discount for 13 Pro versus 14. And all of a sudden, boom, she popped back up to about 20 cents under, and then now stabilized at about 80 cents. 60 cents, excuse me. What's going on about that time? What's happening in that August-September time period? Harvest, spring wheat harvest. Look at how fast the market, cash market, adjusts to new information. Why do we start harvest at about 10 cents under and end harvest at about 80 cents under? Because we had very low proteins. Everybody's looking for 14, but we started getting very low protein wheat coming through the system. The market said, well, we're getting samples in. The elevator started trying to sell this stuff. The cash market said, you know what? We are having a problem developing here, and we don't know how serious it is. As we kept going through harvest, the problem got more and more serious. So essentially, we had 3 years in a row where we had very, very low protein. Then all of a sudden, 2011 hits, and we had much higher protein. So it wasn't hard to get 14 or blend to 14. If you look at the premiums, and again, I'll go through this very quickly, essentially mirror images of each other. The premiums and the discounts are nearly identical. And all of the shifting takes place when? At harvest, right? So we're in a new environment. I've had a lot of issues and questions from farmers saying, how do we try and manage this kind of price volatility and risk? And for better or worse, there's no way a farmer can shed or diversify away from quality risk. That's just something you're going to have to absorb. I know of no way to be able to hedge against the premiums and discounts for protein. So with that, I'll be quiet. That's more information you ever wanted to know. The eyes are starting to glaze over. So Doug, we'll probably save questions for later, or do you want to do them taken now?
Save for later.
All right, very good.
With that, everyone.
All right, fine.
Thanks very much, Frayne.
We can switch.